My parents didn't forget to mention me at my brother's company launch party. They mentioned me exactly the way they meant to, like a footnote nobody needed to read. It was a Thursday evening in October, the kind that smells like cold pavement and ambition. The venue was a converted warehouse in Soho, exposed brick and Edison bulbs, the sort of place that costs 3 times what it looks like it should and charges you for the aesthetic. My brother had rented it out for the launch of his fintech startup, something about AI-driven investment portfolios for high-net-worth clients. He'd been building toward this night for 2 years. The invitations had a QR code. The bartenders wore matching black. I almost didn't come, not because I was busy, though I was, because I knew what my role would be the moment I walked through that door. Supporting character. Background. The sister who shows up so nobody can say she wasn't invited. I'm 31. My name is Elise. I do data forensics for financial systems. Specifically, I trace anomalies in transactional networks, the kind of invisible work that keeps regulators from missing the thing buried 3 layers inside a spreadsheet that turns out to be the whole story. My clients are mostly law firms, federal agencies, the occasional corporate board that's found something they can't explain and needs someone who can. I don't advertise. I don't have a LinkedIn headline. Most people I meet at parties don't know what to do with what I do, so I've learned to say, I work in finance, and let them move on. My brother. I'll call him by what he's always been to me, which is simply my brother, because names stop mattering when patterns do. Is 35 and looks like someone central cast him for the role of successful older brother. Tall, square jaw, the kind of confidence that reads as competence until you've known him long enough to see where it cracks. He moved to New York at 22 and spent the next decade collecting the right contacts the way some people collect debt, enthusiastically, strategically, and with the firm belief that it would all pay off eventually. For a long time, it looked like he was right. My parents drove up from Philadelphia for the launch. They do that for him. Rent a car, book a hotel near Grand Central, dress up. For my work, the last time I remember them asking a follow-up question, I'd just explained what a subpoena was, and my mother had changed the subject to whether I'd tried the new Mediterranean place near their house. They were already at the venue when I arrived. My mother spotted me and smiled in the way she does when she's relieved I look presentable. My father gave me a side hug that ended before it began. Good turnout, my mother said, scanning the room instead of looking at me. Your brother worked so hard for this. I know, I said. She straightened my collar without asking. You should circulate, she said. Don't just stand near us. My father leaned in. Don't make it complicated, he murmured. Big night. Important people. When have I ever made anything complicated? I asked. He looked past me toward the bar. My brother found me 20 minutes later. He was working the room the way he always does. Handshake, eye contact, lean in, laugh at the right moment. When he reached me, he dropped the performance by about half a degree. Glad you could make it, he said, and he meant it the way people mean things when the alternative would have been worse. Of course, I said. He looked at my glass. What are you drinking? Sparkling water. He exhaled through his nose like that was its own kind of judgment. There's someone you should meet. Come on. I should have said I was fine where I was. Instead, I followed him through the crowd because that is what you do when you've spent your entire life being the reasonable one. The man he led me to was standing near the window overlooking the street below. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, dressed in the understated way that signals money that doesn't need to perform. He had the particular stillness of someone who has spent decades in rooms where other people were nervous and learned to let the room come to him. His name was Harold Fenn. I didn't know it yet, but I would. He was talking to 2 younger men when my brother interrupted with the ease of someone who has rehearsed the move. Harold, my brother said warmly, this is my sister. Harold Fenn turned. His eyes were gray and quick. My brother smiled. He's always had a good smile. It reads as warm. It reads as genuine. If you haven't watched it sharp in the way I have, you'd never catch it. She's the quiet one in the family, my brother said. Never quite found her footing, you know how it goes. We love her anyway. My mother appeared at my elbow as if she'd been waiting for a cue. She laughed softly. Elise has always done her own thing. She means well. My father added, she's not really in your world. Don't let her talk your ear off about spreadsheets. They laughed, all 3 of them. A small, tidy laugh that sealed me outside of something without leaving a visible mark. I kept my face still. I've had years of practice keeping my face still. Harold Fenn did not laugh. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't place. Not pity, not politeness. Something more like recognition, except that didn't make any sense because I had never met Harold Fenn in my life. He tilted his head slightly. "Elise," he said, "what's your last name?" I told him. The stillness around him changed, not visibly, but I felt it the way you feel a pressure drop before weather moves in. He said my last name back to me slowly, like he was checking the weight of it. My brother's smile held, but his eyes did the thing they do when a variable has entered the situation that he hadn't accounted for. Harold looked at me directly, not at my brother, not at my parents, at me. "Elise," he said, "are you the one who filed the irregularity report on the Carver Fund in 2019? The room didn't go quiet. It was too loud for that, but the small circle we stood in went very still. My brother blinked. I looked at Harold Fenn. I wasn't sure what I expected my voice to do. It came out level. "I did," I said. He exhaled once, and something in his face shifted. Not dramatically the way it does in movies, but the way a person's face shifts when something they've carried for a long time finally makes sense. "I've been trying to find the analyst who wrote that report for 5 years," he said. His voice was quiet. Measured. "We never got a name. Just the filing number and an external submission code." My brother said, "Sorry, what?" Harold didn't look at him. I wasn't sure what to say, I told Harold honestly. I wasn't sure anyone would act on it. He nodded once, slowly. "They did," he said. 3 enforcement actions. 42 million recovered. The methodology used to isolate the transaction clusters. My team adopted it company-wide. We still use it." The 2 younger men beside him had stopped their side conversation entirely. My mother made a sound, a small confused sound, like a sentence that had lost its footing. My brother laughed once, high and wrong. "Harold, she does independent consulting. Small projects, you know, nothing at that." Harold looked at him then, just once. My brother stopped talking. I looked at Harold Fenn, and for a moment I was back in my apartment in 2019, sitting cross-legged on my floor with 4 monitors and 3 months of transaction logs from a fund that something about it had been wrong. I couldn't explain wrong, not yet. I just knew it the way you know a rhythm is off before you can name which beat is missing. I had been 26. I'd just gone independent after 2 years at a mid-tier accounting firm where my supervisor told me my reports were thorough to the point of being impractical. I had one client, a small nonprofit that needed annual audit support. I had a studio apartment in Astoria and a habit of pulling public fund filings at 11 at night because they were there and something in my brain demanded I look. The Carver Fund was a boutique investment vehicle, private, technically compliant on the surface, the kind of structure that exists in the gray latitude between regulatory buckets. The filings were clean. The footnotes were meticulous. The problem was in the timing. Transaction clusters that should have been random weren't. The intervals between certain redemption events were too consistent. Not obviously. Not in a way that would flag a standard scan. But if you mapped the temporal distribution and ran it against correlated market events, the pattern emerged like a watermark held up to light. Someone was trading on information they shouldn't have had, and the structure of the fund was designed to diffuse it across enough entities that the signal would dissolve into noise before anyone thought to look. I looked anyway. I spent a weekend building a correlation map. Then I filed an anonymous tip with the SEC through their online portal, attached the methodology, and sent a parallel submission to FinRay. I didn't expect anything. Tips go into a system, the system is enormous. I went back to my nonprofit audit. 6 months later, I read a brief item in a financial trade publication about enforcement actions related to a boutique fund. No names I recognized. I filed it away. I didn't think about it again until that October night in a converted Soho warehouse, when a man I'd never met said my name like it meant something. Harold's assistant found me near the end of the evening and handed me a card. "Mr. Fenn would like a follow-up conversation," she said. "When you're available." I looked at the card. Private equity. The kind of firm whose name you see in the fine print of very large things. "Thank you," I said. My brother was waiting for me by the coat check. His jacket was open. His tie loosened, his smile still on but running low. "Quite an entrance," he said. I got my coat. He lowered his voice. "What was that about? The report, the fund, what are you actually doing?" "Independent work," I said. You knew that. He moved closer. Harold Fenn is not someone you want to be on the radar of for the wrong reasons. I looked at him. It came out calmly. I'm on his radar for the right ones. His jaw shifted. Right. Well, don't go making this a whole thing. This was my night. I put on my coat. You made it strange, he said. Coming in here, letting him make a scene over some old filing. You love this, don't you? You always love being the room's surprise. I didn't say anything. He pressed on, quieter now, the edge sharper for it. You know what people see when they look at you, right? Someone who couldn't make it in a real firm, so she freelances and acts like it's a choice. Harold was being polite. I buttoned my coat. He was performing, my brother said. For the room. He doesn't actually. I'm going home, I said. His voice dropped to something almost private. We're family, Elise. My chest did the thing it does when something old and tired gets touched. I know, I said. I know we are. I walked out. Harold Fenn's office was on the 43rd floor of a building in Midtown, with views that looked like the opening shot of something important. His assistant brought coffee. He didn't waste time. Something is wrong in one of our portfolio companies, he said. We've been seeing it for 18 months. Revenue figures that don't map to operational data. Contractor payments to entities that appear twice in the filing structure. Internal audit came back clean, which tells me either they missed it or they were told to. He slid a drive across the desk. I want an independent set of eyes, he said. Someone who isn't inside the story. I picked it up. It was heavier than a drive usually feels when someone hands you the actual question underneath. What scope? I asked. Full access, parallel to the internal team without their knowledge. That's unusual, I said. He looked at me without blinking. So was your report, he said, and it was correct. I tipped the drive home. My apartment is small. Not apologetically small. Intentionally small, the way a ship's cabin is small. 1 desk, 2 monitors, a wall of hanging files, a window that faces the building next door. I do my best work in spaces where there's nowhere for distraction to sit. I started with the contractor payments. They're always the easiest place to see what a structure is trying to hide, because contractors exist in the interstitial space where the money can move without fully committing to a ledger line. 4 vendors, high invoices, vague service descriptions. I pulled their incorporation records. One was registered in Delaware 18 months ago, which was normal. One was registered in Nevada with a registered agent shared by 11 other entities, which was less normal. 2 were in Wyoming, incorporated within a week of each other, different names, same address, an address that turned out to be a UPS store off I-80. I mapped the payment flows. The money went in as consulting fees. It came back in through a secondary holding structure as strategic advisory returns. The round trip was imperfect but elegant, the kind of thing that survives a standard audit because the 2 legs of the journey are reviewed by different teams who never compare notes. I'd been in the data for 4 days when I found the approval signatures. My brother's company was one of 5 named vendors providing technology integration services to the portfolio company. The invoices were recent, 18 months of them, timed to coincide exactly with when Harold's internal team had started seeing the anomalies. The amounts were not large enough to immediately flag, but they were consistent, and they were tied to the same secondary holding structure as the Wyoming entities. My brother's signature was on 3 of the vendor agreements. His name appeared in the metadata of 2 invoice documents. The email address in the submission records was a variant of one he'd been using since business school. I sat with that for a long time. I got up, made coffee, stood by my window and looked at the building next door, where someone on the 4th floor had a plant that was doing extremely well for the amount of light they got. Then I sat back down. He called the next morning like he knew. He probably didn't. He probably just called because guilt is noisy and proximity makes it louder. I need to talk to you, he said. I know, I said. A pause. How much do you know? Enough, I said. He exhaled, the sound of a man calculating. Listen, whatever you think you found, it's more complicated than it looks. These structures are common in this space. Nobody's doing anything that isn't done by every firm at this level. Is that what you'd like me to put in my report? I asked. His voice changed. Elise, I'm your brother. I know, I said again. You'd actually do this? You'd go to Fen and over what? Some invoices. After everything Mom and Dad have. After everything our family. I stopped him there. Gently, because some doors only need a small push. You introduced me to a room full of people as someone who never found her footing, I said. Your launch party. 2 months ago, you and Mom and Dad made it very clear what you thought my work was worth, right in front of the person whose fund I'd flagged 5 years ago. You didn't know that. But you should understand that I've spent a long time knowing my own value in this family, and it has never been in question for me, only for you. He was quiet. I have a job to do, I said. I'm going to do it. He came to my apartment the next day anyway. I didn't let him in. We talked through the slightly open door like people in a building where something has already been decided. He tried several things in the following order. He said it wasn't what it looked like. He said he could explain the vendor relationships. He said I owed him without being specific about what for. He said Mom would be devastated. He said Dad would never forgive me. He said I was doing this because I was jealous that his launch had gone well. He said I was doing this because I'd never gotten over being overlooked. He said I was small and vindictive and that Harold Fenn would move on the moment I stopped being useful and I would have destroyed my family for nothing. I listened. I didn't answer most of it. When he was done, I said, I'm going to recommend you get a lawyer. He looked at me through the gap in the door. For a moment, his face did something I hadn't seen it do in years. It dropped the performance and went somewhere younger and more frightened. I recognized it. We grew up in the same house. Then it closed again. You'll regret this, he said. You already do, I replied. I submitted my report to Harold on a Tuesday. It was 63 pages, methodologically documented, with 3 appendices. I did not editorialize. I did not add anything that wasn't in the data. The data was enough. Harold read it in a day. His response was 2 sentences. Thank you. We're moving forward. Moving forward meant outside counsel. It meant forensic accountants. It meant a conversation with the SEC that I was not part of, but was told afterward had involved my report as a primary source document. My brother's company was named in the inquiry. The vendor agreements were suspended pending investigation. The portfolio company was restructured. My brother hired a defense attorney. I know this because my mother called me from Philadelphia in a voice I hadn't heard since a different crisis, flat like something had been taken out of it. What did you do? She said. I told the truth. I said. He's your family. I was your daughter, I said. You told a room full of strangers that I'd never found my footing. You laughed, all 3 of you. And that was before you knew who was listening. She didn't say anything. I didn't need her to. My father called the next week. He didn't ask how I was. He said, You know this doesn't just affect your brother. You know what you've done to this family. I said, I know it was done to the family. I didn't start the chain. He said I was being righteous. I said I was being accurate. He said there was no difference. I said there was and hung up gently because I was raised well enough that I can disagree with someone and still close the door quietly. Harold called me in March. Not about my brother's case. About something else, a new situation. A different portfolio company. Early signals. Nothing confirmed. He asked if I'd be willing to take a look. I said yes. He offered me a formal position at the end of that call. Not forensics, something broader. A senior analytical role, building out the methodology for the whole portfolio. The salary was the kind of number that ends a certain kind of worry. I thought about it for 3 days. Then I called him back and said no. He was quiet for a moment. Can I ask why? Because I don't want to be inside the institution, I said. I want to be the person you call when the institution can't see itself clearly. That only works if I'm outside it. Another pause. Then he said, What would make the outside arrangement work for you? We negotiated a retainer, defined scope, clear deliverables, no entanglements. Work that belonged to me and conclusions that were mine to stand behind. It wasn't a salary. It was better than that. The investigation into my brother's arrangements took most of the following year. I wasn't involved in that process. My work was done. The report was filed. What happened next was between lawyers and federal calendars and the slow machinery of consequence. I know there were civil proceedings. I know there were settlements. I know there is an ongoing condition on his ability to work in certain advisory capacities for the next several years. I know my parents stopped calling after the second quarter, not permanently. They called it Thanksgiving cautiously, the way you test ice you're not sure will hold. My father asked about work. I told him it was going well. My mother asked if I was eating enough, which is her way of reaching for something when she doesn't know what else to hold. I said yes. It wasn't warm. It wasn't what I'd have chosen, but it was honest, and honesty has always been the only currency in my life that doesn't depreciate. I drove past the Soho warehouse in February. I don't know why. It wasn't on the way to anywhere I needed to be. The street was quieter than it had been that night in October. A coffee place had opened in the ground floor of the building across from it. I thought about standing in that circle of people, my brother's hand steering me forward like I was a prop he'd almost forgotten, my mother's small laugh, my father's studied indifference, and Harold Fenn's face when he heard my name, not lighting up the way faces do in the stories we tell ourselves about recognition, but going still, the way a person goes still when something slots into place after a long time out of alignment. She's never quite found her footing. At the time it landed the way it was meant to, like a verdict. Now I understand it was a confession, a statement about what they needed me to be, not about what I was. Labels like that aren't judgments. They're load-bearing walls. They hold up the story the people around you need to keep telling. The moment you stop carrying the weight, the story shifts. I'm not interested in being anyone's story. I do the work. I follow the pattern. I file the report and let the data say what it says without apology. If there's anything I'd tell the version of myself standing in that corner with a glass of sparkling water, watching her family perform for a room that wasn't watching, it's this: the people who need you small will never tell you what you're actually worth. That's not cruelty, most of the time. It's fear. They can feel the shape of what you are even when they can't name it. Let them feel it, do the work anyway. The record will outlast the room. I keep thinking about the plant on the 4th floor of the building across from my window. The one that has no business being as healthy as it is, given how little light it gets. Nobody talks about that plant. Nobody posts about it. It just keeps growing because that's what it was built to do. That's what I come back to when I try to make sense of everything that happened. I didn't file that report in 2019 because I was brave. I filed it because something in the data was wrong and my brain wouldn't let it go. That's not heroism, that's just how I'm wired. But I've learned that doing the right thing quietly, without an audience, without recognition, without even the expectation that anyone will ever know it was you, is its own kind of integrity. Not because it earns you something later, because it's what you can live inside without the walls closing in. Harold Fenn didn't remember my name because I impressed him at a party. He remembered it because the work was true. That's the part my brother never understood about me, and maybe never will. He built his career on rooms, on who was watching, who was nodding, who would remember his face. I built mine on problems. Problems don't care about your reputation. They care about whether you can see them clearly enough to solve them. And that's where the discipline comes in. Not discipline like punishment. Discipline like the thing that keeps you at the desk at 11 at night, with transaction logs open when nobody is asking you to be there. The thing that says, look closer. The thing that says, the answer's in here. You just haven't found it yet. I've had to protect that in myself. My family didn't value it. Parts of the world I moved through didn't value it. I had to decide, a long time ago, that I was going to trust my own read of what mattered, even when the room around me was very confidently pointing in another direction. That's harder than it sounds, especially when the room includes your parents. What my brother did, the fraud, the shell companies, the engineered detours, that was the long consequence of a character built on performance rather than substance. Every shortcut he took made the next one easier to justify. Every invoice he signed told him the system was a thing to be gamed rather than trusted. He was smart enough to build something complicated. He wasn't honest enough with himself to see where it was going. That gap between intelligence and integrity is where things fall apart. I've seen it in data structures and I've seen it in people, and it looks the same either way. A system that's optimized to hide its own failures will eventually produce one it can't contain. I made the choice to file the report the first time without knowing it would matter. I made the choice to submit the audit without knowing what it would cost me. Both times I made the choice because it was the only one I could make and still recognize myself in the morning. That's the only compass I know how to use. Not what the room approves of. Not what keeps the peace. what I can stand behind when no one is watching and nothing is promised. The record outlasts the room. It always does.